In 1961, the young heir to one of the world's wealthiest and most influential families mysteriously vanished in the land of untouched forests and primitive tribes. Michael Rockefeller, just 23 years old, had set out on an expedition to Papua New Guinea with an adventurous spirit. However, this journey unexpectedly turned into a story of mystery and horror. A routine trip that began one morning on a boat became one of history's most famous disappearances within a few hours. How could a Rockefeller vanish without a trace on a tropical river? Did he drown helplessly struggling in an ocean full of sharks? Or did he meet a much darker end, eaten by a cannibal tribe? These questions have been waiting to be answered ever since. Let's examine Michael Rockefeller's chilling disappearance story step by step and take a closer look at the most talked about theories. Michael Clark Rockefeller was born into a family belonging to the elite class of the United States. His father, Nelson Rockefeller, was the governor of New York, and his grandfather, John Rockefeller, was one of the wealthiest businessmen in history. Despite this privileged life, Michael was a young man who chose to leave it behind and embark on an adventure. As soon as he graduated from Harvard University, he set his sights on distant lands, particularly Papua New Guinea. His goal was to observe and document the cultures, artworks, and daily lives of tribes living almost completely unaware of the modern world. He was particularly drawn to the Asmat region in the southwestern part of the area, surrounded by swamp forests and rivers. The region's name came from the Asmat people, renowned for their magnificent wood carvings, as well as their headhunting and cannibalistic rituals. Yes, Michael Rockefeller wanted to see with his own eyes a world far from civilization, where people kept the skulls of their enemies as trophies and performed bloody rituals. By 1961, Michael had made two separate expeditions to these lands, known as Dutch New Guinea under Dutch colonial rule. On the first, he participated in an ethnographic documentary shoot in high mountain villages with a team of anthropologists. In the second, he had returned to the Asmat regions to begin collecting tribal art. This young collector dreamed of exhibiting the Asmat sculptures and masks he had collected at the Primitive Art Museum he helped establish in New York. But who could have known that Michael Rockefeller's name would later be associated more with a mystery of a missing person than with an art collection? In November 1961, Michael Rockefeller, accompanied by Dutch anthropologist René Wassing and two local guides, was attempting to cross a river mouth on the Asmat coast. On the morning of November 17, 1961, they set out to sea from the mouth of the Betz River in a narrow, long catamaran. Suddenly, the weather turned violent. The conflicting currents and wind whipped up the waves, hitting their boat. A large wave came out of nowhere, flooding the engines and stopping them, and immediately capsized the boat. Michael and Wassing clung to the hull of the capsized boat, while the two young locals with them immediately jumped into the water. As they tried to swim toward the shore in the muddy waters created by the confluence of the river and the sea, Michael and Wassing helplessly waited for help in the capsized boat. The local guides were strong swimmers. They struggled for hours in the swampy coastal waters and finally reached the village of Agat in the Asmat region in the evening, where they relayed the news of their rescue. However, Michael and René Wassing were unaware of this information. They spent 2 nights clinging to their capsized boat in the desolate sea. After hours of hunger, thirst, and uncertainty, their situation was critical when the sun rose on the morning of November 19th. Michael realized that they were drifting out to sea with the wreckage. The shore might not have been far away, but help was nowhere in sight. Around 8 o'clock, he made a radical decision. He took off his extra clothes and was left in just his underwear. He tied the 2 empty gasoline cans he had with him to his waist, making himself a kind of life preserver, and set out to swim toward the shore. Wassing watched helplessly as his friend's silhouette faded into the distance. As Michael swam away with determined strokes, even the silhouette of the misty coastal trees was barely visible. This was the last time Michael Rockefeller was seen. Wassing was left alone, not knowing Michael's fate. That same afternoon, a search plane spotted the capsized boat and Wassing from the air. However, Michael was nowhere to be found. The next morning, on November 20th, a rescue boat picked up Renee Wassing alive. Now all eyes were on finding this wealthy young American. The news of Michael's disappearance made international headlines. His father, Nelson Rockefeller, flew immediately to New Guinea on a private plane with his sister Mary. The Dutch colonial administration and American authorities launched a massive search and rescue operation. Ships, planes, helicopters, and hundreds of local volunteers combed the coastline, river deltas, and swamps for weeks. However, neither Michael nor any trace of his body was found. On November 24th, almost a week after Michael's disappearance, Dutch authorities announced that there was no hope of finding Michael alive. Although the Rockefeller family tried to appear hopeful, saying that Michael might have a chance of survival if he managed to reach the shore, on November 28th, his father Nelson and sister were forced to return to their country. The search continued for another 2 weeks. The official search was called off in mid-December. The result was complete uncertainty. With the failure of the search operation, the Michael Rockefeller case became a complete mystery. Authorities and family initially voiced the most plausible scenario. This probably happened while Michael was trying to swim. The ocean currents were strong. The young man could have become exhausted, been swept away by the current, or suffered from hypothermia. Some even suggested he might have been attacked by sharks or saltwater crocodiles in the area. This was reflected in the official records. Michael's probable cause of death was listed as drowning. However, this explanation did not satisfy many people's curiosity. There was not a single piece of concrete evidence. Michael's body had not been found. He had gasoline cans in his hands and was well educated and athletic. Perhaps he really had reached the shore. If so, where had he disappeared to afterwards? The possibilities that came to mind were much more chilling. Other claims began to circulate in the newspapers and gossip columns of the time. Although Nelson Rockefeller seemed to care about the speculation surrounding his son's fate, the world press was abuzz with rumors. At this point, 3 main theories emerged about Michael Rockefeller's disappearance. The first was drowning at sea or being eaten by wild animals. The second was being killed by local tribesmen or even cannibalism. The third was surviving and living secretly among the tribes. Now let's look at these theories one by one. The most common but plausible explanation was that Michael unfortunately died at sea before reaching his destination. After capsizing, the exhausted young explorer had tried to swim a difficult distance estimated at 3 to 10 miles. The ocean's strong currents may have swept him out to sea, leaving him exhausted. In this case, he either drowned or was attacked by sharks in the area. It was not surprising that a body would quickly disappear in tropical waters. The currents could have carried the body far away, or it could have been torn apart by sea creatures. Indeed, since search teams could not find any trace of Michael, this theory was initially accepted as the most likely scenario. However, some details called into question the theory that he had been the victim of an accident. The 2 empty fuel cans tied to Michael's waist had provided him with extra buoyancy. It was puzzling that an experienced swimmer equipped with such containers could have suffered a worse fate than Wassing, who spent 2 days in the sea and still survived. Moreover, according to Dutch officials, shark attacks were quite rare on the Asmat coast. The area was full of reef sharks that had never encountered human flesh and did not usually attack people. Still, it was difficult to say for sure. Many people, including the Rockefeller family, accepted the official drowning theory and held a funeral for the young man. But the same question echoed in everyone's mind. What if he didn't drown? What happened to Michael after he managed to reach the shore? The most terrifying and intriguing theory surrounding Michael Rockefeller's disappearance is that he may have been killed and even ceremonially eaten by a native tribe in Papua New Guinea. While this idea may sound legendary at first glance, it was not impossible considering the traditions of the Asmat people. The Asmat villages were groups that had very limited contact with the outside world at that time. They frequently fought among themselves. They practiced a bloody tradition called headhunting and considered spilling their enemies' blood and consuming their flesh to be a cosmic necessity. Michael Rockefeller entered the lands of these people and attempted to document their culture. He did so alone and defenseless. Immediately after news of Michael's disappearance spread, rumors began to whisper throughout the region. Although Dutch authorities claimed there was no evidence that Rockefeller had been killed by the locals, the rumors could not be suppressed. Local Catholic missionaries and some regional officials began hearing strange stories from nearby villages as soon as the search and rescue efforts ended. Shortly thereafter, these stories were compiled and turned into reports. A priest named Hubertus von Paige, who served in the village of Omadisep, took notes on what 4 locals with close ties to the neighboring village of Otsjanep came to tell him. Michael Rockefeller had reached the shore. He had been found by Otsjanep warriors, killed, and eaten. Around the same time, another missionary named Cornelius van Kessel, whom Michael had planned to meet, heard similar rumors in Otsjanep. He also had detailed conversations with the villagers and wrote a long report in December 1961. In his report, Van Kessel stated that the details given in the native language matched his own research exactly, and he emphasized one sentence entirely in capital letters. It is certain that Michael Rockefeller was killed and eaten by the Otsjanep. The details of the incident were described in these reports in a manner that was chillingly explicit. The people who killed Michael were identified by name, and even which body parts belonged to whom were noted. So, why were the locals accused of killing Michael? The answer lay in a bloody encounter that took place 4 years before Michael disappeared. In December 1957, a clash broke out between the villages of Otsjanep and Omadisep, killing dozens of Asmat men. Subsequently, a Dutch patrol officer, Max Lapre, who arrived in the area, wanted to punish the village of Otsjanep. Armed police under Lapre's command raided the village and shot and killed 5 Asmat men. 4 of those killed were leaders of the village's most important men's house, known as the Jo. According to Asmat belief, the spirits of these dead men would remain restless. The village would be cursed. The only solution was to appease their spirits with the blood of those who killed them. That is, to take a head in retaliation. However, Lapre and his men who carried out the massacre had long since left. There were no other white people in the vicinity. It seemed impossible for the Asmat people to take revenge. Until Michael Rockefeller set out alone in 1961. According to Van Kessel and Van Pai's reports, the spot where Michael landed by boat coincided exactly with the area where the Otsjanep warriors had set up camp. About 50 Otsjanep men had traveled along the coast in their canoes the night before and stopped to rest at the mouth of the Efta River early in the morning. On the morning of November 20th, Michael, tired and exhausted, stepped ashore and suddenly encountered this group. The Asmat warriors saw before them a young white man who had emerged from the water, exhausted. For some, he may have been a castaway in need of help. Indeed, according to claims, some of them considered taking Michael into their canoes and rescuing him. However, one of the group's leaders, a warrior named Pep, did not hesitate. He pointed his spear and stabbed Michael in the ribs. After this first non-fatal blow, the others also sprang into action and surrounded Michael. The young man was brutally murdered on the spot. Following Asmat tradition, his head was severed from his body. His body was cut into pieces. The tribe had taken its long-awaited revenge. According to legend, Michael's skull was hung in the home of Finn, the village chief. His thigh bones were kept to be used in spear making. It was said that his flesh was cooked in a ceremonial feast and eaten together. In this Asmat war culture, this was considered a way to incorporate the enemy's power into one's own body. These horrific allegations were initially concealed by the authorities. Although the missionaries' reports reached the Dutch colonial administration in December 1961, a secret telegram sent to New Guinea Governor Las Lahe stated that there was no evidence yet. Therefore, he said it was not appropriate to disclose this information to the press or the Rockefeller family. Church officials had also ordered priests to remain silent. The subject was as fragile as glass, and the spread of rumors could damage missionary activities. Indeed, in March 1962, a Dutch agency denied reports leaked from the region that Rockefeller had been killed by cannibals. An investigation was conducted. It was announced that no evidence had been found. However, the real investigation was just beginning. A young Dutch officer named Wim van Vollenhoven had been secretly assigned to the case. Ironically, Van Vollenhoven was the person who sold Michael his boat. In mid-1962, he lived in the village of Otienep for months, conducting his own investigation. Although the villagers were uncomfortable with his presence, he gradually gained their trust. At the end of 3 months, the story he heard was not much different from that of the priests. The people of Otienep indirectly confessed to killing a white man. When Vollenhoven demanded concrete evidence to present to his superiors, the locals took him to a spot in the forest and dug up a skull and several bone fragments buried in the mud. The skull was missing its lower jaw and had a hole in the temple. Just as the Asmat warriors did when they hunted an enemy, they ritually removed the lower jaw of the skull and drilled a hole in the head to remove the brain. Although Vollenhoven collected these remains, his report was never fully reflected in official documents, as the transfer of New Guinea's administration to Indonesia was taking place at that time. The Dutch quietly withdrew from the island, and the Rockefeller file was officially closed. For 10 years, the claim that Michael Rockefeller had indeed been killed by the natives remained an unproven rumor. However, this information, which emerged behind the scenes, later attracted the attention of some investigative journalists. In 2014, author Carl Hoffman published his years of research in a book titled Wild Harvest. When Hoffman compiled the secret reports from the Dutch archives, the findings from the crime scene, and his interviews with the Asmat elders, he saw that the accounts corroborated each other. Michael had most likely come ashore and been killed by the spears of the Otienep warriors. The elderly Asmat witnesses Hoffman interviewed confirmed that the killers named in the reports were the sons or close relatives of the former leaders killed in 1957. These men had fulfilled a sacred duty to avenge their father's blood. According to the accounts, when Michael reached the shore, this young man, normally the son of the most powerful family in the world, was nothing more than prey on Asmat soil. As the spears pierced him, the Otienep warriors believed they had restored balance to the world. The villagers passed this story down among themselves as a legendary secret. However, they never officially admitted it. According to Asmat culture, talking openly about such a thing invited both physical and spiritual retribution. They whispered these secrets from generation to generation, saying that if you mentioned this to someone from another village, you would die. In light of all this emerging information, we can say that the cannibal tribe theory regarding Michael Rockefeller's fate is now supported by very strong evidence. As unbelievable as it may sound, perhaps the young explorer's life ended with the bloody rituals of the Asmat culture that had so captivated him. However, since there is no official definitive evidence, such as remains confirmed by DNA analysis, Rockefeller's family remains skeptical. Some circles never fully accepted this theory. The veil of mystery had not been fully lifted, even after 60 years. Perhaps the most unusual and surprising claim about Michael Rockefeller was that he was not killed but survived and lived among the local tribe for a long time. This theory is, of course, highly speculative and controversial. However, thanks to some evidence that has been brought to light, it has occasionally been brought up. At first, some people thought that Michael might have been captured by locals but not killed, and that he was somehow unable to communicate with the outside world. Even while the search was ongoing, there were those who said he might be living somewhere in the forests. So what was this claim based on? In fact, no concrete evidence had emerged over the years. There were only a few anecdotes that made people wonder. Some tour guides reported that in the 1970s, there was talk of a legend about the spirit of a white man in the area. There were even claims that a strange foreign figure had been seen wandering among the tribes. However, these never went beyond being rumors. At the end of the 2010s, a development occurred that breathed new life into this theory. An old film recording, said to have been shot in the 1960s, came to light and received widespread media coverage. The archive video in question showed a ritual of the Asmat tribe in Papua New Guinea. Among the people in the frame, a white man with war paint on his body and carrying a spear was selected. This person, who had the same clothing and adornments as the Asmat natives beside him, was the only figure who, at first glance, was clearly not from the local community. These images were reflected in the press with the headline, "Rockefeller may have lived among the cannibal tribe for years." Allegedly, the white man's facial features resembled Michael's, which led to speculation that the missing millionaire had actually been accepted into the tribe rather than killed, having won their acceptance. As intriguing as this claim was, it was met with skepticism by the scientific community. Proving that the person in the video was indeed Michael Rockefeller was nearly impossible. The image was unclear, and given the passage of years, Michael might have been unrecognizable. Nevertheless, conspiracy theorists did not hesitate to fabricate stories such as Rockefeller surviving and leading the tribe as a white god. In such cases, it was even suggested that Michael might have provided technological knowledge to the tribe, living and dying with them. However, looking at the concrete evidence at home, this was more of a fantasy than a legend. Moreover, considering the cultural structure of the Asmat, it was highly unlikely that a foreigner could live undetected for a long time in a society where the balance of male population and revenge rituals were important. Nevertheless, the video recording in question raised some questions. On the one hand, some documentaries made in the past implied that the Otigenet villagers had killed Michael. It was even reported that an elderly man boasted that they had eaten Rockefeller. If this video is accurate, who could the white man in the video footage be? Perhaps the person in the footage was another anthropologist or missionary in the region. What is certain is that the theory that Michael Rockefeller survived continues to exist as an appealing story in popular culture. Especially on social media and internet forums, tales of a white man who lived among the natives like a real-life Tarzan are circulating once again. However, none of these have truly provided a credible alternative to the strong evidence supporting the theory that he was killed by a cannibal tribe. Despite the decades that have passed, the fate of Michael Rockefeller has not been fully clarified. Although he is officially considered dead, the uncertainty surrounding the manner of his death has kept interest in the case alive. Books have been written, documentaries made, and even plays staged on the subject. Based on the evidence we have today, it is possible to draw the following conclusion. Michael Rockefeller most likely met a tragic end in the swampy lands. The facts revealed in missionaries' reports and research conducted in the 2010s strongly support the theory that he was killed by a tribe. However, since official authorities have never confirmed this, a shadow of doubt remains. Perhaps one day his bones will be identified through DNA testing in Papua's swampy forests, or the tribe's secrets will be fully revealed. Until then, Michael Rockefeller's disappearance will continue to be debated. In a way, this story symbolizes the striking clash between two worlds, a modern, wealthy, educated young man of the 20th century versus a community living in Stone Age conditions, clinging to their ancient beliefs. The result is a mystery that raises more questions than it answers. Would you have abandoned civilization to embark on such an adventure? Which theory do you believe about what happened to Michael Rockefeller? Perhaps the truth will never be fully known, and this secret will remain hidden forever in the dark river waters of Papua New Guinea. But one thing is certain, Michael Rockefeller's tragic adventure with its mysterious story will continue to stir the imagination of humanity for many years to come. That's the end of this video. See you next time. Take care.